对啊，这个一直做，这个是算好的。是啊，对，类似那种，以后会不会就不知道了？还是在我也是。那也是一样的。
Hi there. So I think we can start now. So first, a bit about the space. If you've never been here, this is DAYBREAK, which was founded by Blvd magazine. We were founded in 2014 after the Sunfire movement. We were mostly students that participated in the movement. They felt there was a need after that to try and build a publication to connect Taiwan and the world in that sense, in terms of a more left-wing perspective. And so that became a publication. We published daily on politics, social issues, and a few years back we decided we should also build community, for example, by opening a physical space, which is what became this, DAYBREAK. And so, yeah, so thank you for coming. It's a entirely volunteer run, and today we have Noor here to speak with us. I had Noor's phone on my bio on my phone, and then I'm using my phone to record, so I don't actually hear bio. You might have to choose one.
Hi everyone, my name is Noor Azizah. I'm the director of Rohingya Maiyafuinor Collaborative Network. So Maiyafuinor just means women in our language. So it's Rohingya of Women Collaborative Network. We are a refugee-led, completely led by Rohingya women that have survived the mass atrocities and genocide in Burma, and we've all resettled in other countries, in Canada, America, Australia, like myself. The common thing that we all have faced in our team is that we've all been displaced in Asia, in the ASEAN region. So we all have the lived experience as refugees in Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. I'll keep the speaking shorter because there is an amazing documentary, and we'll have a conversation, and you might have some questions about the documentary or about the Rohingya genocide itself. I can give you a bit of a rundown about the documentary. This is a documentary about a group of Rohingya women, which is my team, when we visited our community in Malaysia last year. So in Malaysia, there are more than 100,000 Rohingya refugees living there today, living without any legal protection because Malaysia is not part of the Refugee Convention. So we decided that this was a blind spot and we needed to go there to visit our community that are currently in exile. We focus on women and children in particular because we understand what it's like to live as Rohingya women refugees in the region. I lived in Malaysia as a refugee for 8.5 years. And let me tell you, that was not beautiful. So my family and I, we fled Burma, Myanmar in the 90s when the military came to our village and burnt my home to the ground, my village to the ground. They were raping women and doing all sorts of mass atrocities you can think of. And my mother carried 5 of her children across the borders, across Southeast Asia, and we ended up in Malaysia. Today, I live in Australia and I've sought asylum there. I've lived there for 20 years now. You can hear it from my very nasally Australian accent. But this documentary is really beautiful, it's really powerful. There is hate speech against Rohingya that's spreading in Malaysia. When we went there, we also wanted to dismantle this hate narrative against the Rohingya in Malaysia. There is the rhetoric that Rohingya are fleeing to Malaysia because we want to steal their lands. We are these black refugees that have just arrived in their islands. So there are rising anti-Rohingya movements that are also causing the same violence that's occurring in Burma in Malaysia today. So the hate speech is manifesting to actual violence. So that's a very short, long introduction of the video. I'll pass it over to Brian.
Yeah, so the film will run for 20-30 minutes and then we'll talk after that. Yes, the one over there. Testing. Okay, cool. Let's have strict spelling. Yeah, so first, could you talk a bit about the film then?
So the film says it's a snippet of what we did in Malaysia. In Malaysia, we were trying to look for a commitment from either an NGO or from government to protect the most vulnerable and the most persecuted community in the world, according to the United Nations. Rohingya are the most persecuted minority in the entire world, the most unwanted community in the world. So the whole point of going to Malaysia, it was very bittersweet for me, because it was going back to a place that didn't really give me a home, that brought back really horrendous memories in a very personal way. I lived in Sabah. Hands up if you've been to Malaysia. Did you go to Kuala Lumpur? Yeah, most of you probably. I lived as a refugee in Sabah. If you've been to Sabah, it's a very secluded town. It has absolutely nothing, and we were the only Rohingya family there. So going back was heartbreaking, but also rewarding at the same time, seeing that my community was still there and they were still living and they still had hope for their children. Despite all the barriers, despite all the issues that arise when it comes to the word Rohingya, because it seems like many ASEAN states are a little bit allergic to the word Rohingya, hope still endures, not because of me, but it's because of the mothers, the Rohingya mothers in Malaysia that are still hoping for a better life for their very children. So the whole point of going to Malaysia was to improve the lives of our people that are so voiceless, that have absolutely nothing, but still are looking for a brighter future for their children. Not for themselves, but for their very children.
So how many people know about the situation regarding Myanmar and Rohingyas? Okay, maybe you could talk a bit about that then.
So the Rohingya, we have faced systemic, direct, cultural erasure for 83 years until today. The main perpetrator of the genocide is the Burmese military junta. Over the years, we have seen other players come into place and also contributing to the genocide. The genocide started with removing Rohingya families from their homes, putting them in IDP camps, giving Rohingya homes to Rakhine Buddhist families, and conducting mass killings, spreading hate speech against Rohingya in the country itself, utilizing hate speech as a way to normalize genocide, calling us animals, cockroaches. And when you do that in the country, when you spread this kind of language and compare it to the Rohingya, when violence do occur against us, it's completely normalized because we've been compared to something that's less than a human. Removing our citizenship in 1982, statelessness. I was born as a stateless person. Today we are the largest stateless community in the world. Burning villages and homes. In 2017, the genocidal campaign, Operation Clearance, they burnt more than 300 villages to the ground. They built Chokbu pipeline that went across from Rakhine to China during genocide, displaced more than 700,000 Rohingya refugees that are currently living in Bangladesh, the largest refugee camp in the world that is hosting more than 1 million Rohingya today. And in terms of the recent violence that we've seen in the last year, more than 100,000 Rohingya have fled and made their way to Bangladesh and crossed the North River. My team and I provided humanitarian aid to more than 3,000 Rohingya families. Women and children were arriving completely injured. A lot of them came without their husbands and their sons because with the testimonies we received, a lot of the husbands have been kidnapped and the sons have been kidnapped by the Rakhine army to fight with them, but they've been killed. So the recent genocidal violence was carried out by the Rakhine army, so-called resistant movements. And there are reports to say that by the UN, by the survivors themselves. Who else to believe but the survivors? And today the situation remains extremely dire. It's the most underreported genocide, I would say, and receiving very little public support or public movements. And a lot of the work, the peace work, is led by genocide survivors themselves, like myself and my team, which we absolutely love doing. But we need more than that for reconciliation, for us to go back home. We need more support from the wider movements, which is why it's so important for me to be here and to be in this very room with all of you that also play a huge role in ending this mass atrocity and genocide happening in the backyard of Taiwan.
Yeah, so then as you talked about then, that genocide has continued in the midst of what was then a military coup that then became a civil war. But then could you talk a bit about the situation facing Rohingya outside of Myanmar, for example, with many people now in exile?
So when we started the organization 2 years ago, so myself and you saw Maiyafuinor, amazing Rohingya woman, she fled, just like me, fled Rakhine at a very young age. Her mother carried her and her brother and ended up in Thailand. She lived as a refugee in Thailand for 16 years. She speaks fluent Thai. Someone in the audience came to our event in Bangkok and heard Yasmin speak fluent Thai. And the other team members, the younger 2 members, they were also displaced in Malaysia. So we all speak the languages of ASEAN. We cover the languages. I can speak Bahasa Melayu, Yasmin can speak Thai, Lao, we have Indonesian speakers. And the first thing we wanted to do was focus on Rohingya displacement in ASEAN, because that becomes a blind spot. When we think of Rohingya, we think of Bangladesh, which is extremely important, but then we forget about our very community that have very little support in these countries. So we said, we need to go and visit our community in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and that was the first thing we did. First thing we did was go to Indonesia, go to Aceh, a year and a half ago. And in Aceh, there was one refugee camp housing 151 Rohingya. They fled by boat. Most of them were children. Today, because of the increased violence in Burma and in Bangladesh in the camp, there are about 7 Rohingya refugee camps. So it's increased from 1 to 7 today. And UNHCR stated that in the last year, there's been an 80% increase of Rohingya movements across the Andaman Sea, arriving in Indonesia and Malaysia. And what's also happening amidst the hate speech rising and anti-Rohingya movements rising as well, governments are not allowing for boats to disembark. They're pushing boats away. In January this year, 2 boats arrived in Malaysia. There were about 300 Rohingya. The Malaysian government said, we'll give you some food, but goodbye, see you later. They were not allowed to disembark and they were stuck at sea. So what we are seeing is the normalization of policies that does not allow Rohingya to live freely in the countries that they are exiling. In Malaysia, there are more than 1,500 Rohingya children detained today. Some of them separated from their parents. Even UNHCR are not allowed to enter the detention centres. Human Rights Watch released a report on this about a year ago, and the testimonies were horrendous. Some of the children were facing physical abuse and sexual abuse by the officers that were looking after these detention centres. So these are the very problems that Rohingya are facing in the regions that they're in exile in, and that we are working on as a team to improve their lives, given we have some level of privilege with our Australian passports, Canadian passports, American passports. If I was telling the group earlier that there are 3 million Rohingya today. More than 90% of us are outside of our country. We've really been pushed to leave the country. That underscores the severity. And out of the 3 million, can you guess how many percent live in freedom? Early group, don't tell people. Just call out a percentage out of 3 million. Anything? 5%? Yeah. Close. 1%. 1% out of 3 million Rohingya live with freedom, identity, and I'm part of that 1%. And the 99% live in refugee camps, are in hiding, or in exile, constantly on the run. And this, what I call, is a lack of political will. Most ASEAN countries just want the Rohingya problem to go away. They want it to disappear, they want to monetize it and put money in their pockets. The graveyard you saw just now on the border of Thailand and Malaysia, those Rohingya that were trafficked, they were sold as slaves by the Thai and Malay governments. When they are placed in detention, there is a third box that they can tick. The third box is to transfer them to these jungles where they are forced to work as slaves. And what happens is, the traffickers ask the Rohingya, call your family that are in Canada and tell them to send you money to give to me. And if you don't give it to me, we will kill you. And those are the very bodies that were killed. There was a woman, her body was found, she was 8 months pregnant. And she was one of the women that were trafficked as well. There's an incredible documentary on this on Prime, so I'm not just talking out of my nothing. But yeah, so the work that we do is very important. We've had to also go out of our scope and focus on Bangladesh as well because of the recent genocidal violence. We've had to step up and provide the humanitarian aid with whatever funding we can find through organising nights like this in Malaysia, not Malaysia, in US and Canada and Australia, where most people can come and pay a fee and have a plate of Rohingya food, and all of the funding that we retrieve goes to our people that have just fled. Another very important issue that we had to deal with last year was the human trafficking ring that are taking advantage of the Rohingya genocide and also exploiting Rohingya women. There was Rohingya women fleeing Bangladesh, and Indonesian human traffickers told them that he would tip the boat if they didn't do what he told them to do. Some of these women said, no, we're not going to do it, and he tipped the boat and killed them, and they died. And 6 women, he raped 6 women, and they arrived in Aceh, Indonesia, pregnant. And as you know, in Aceh, it's Sharia law, so there is no access to abortion. And these women ended up pregnant, and we had to step up and provide that gender-sensitive care, and they've given birth 2 months ago. And because of the US aid funding. That was from that funding. We have not been able to continue that, and that's going to be another constant worry. But these are some of the genocidal violence it doesn't end when you flee Burma. It continues in Southeast Asia where Rohingya are fleeing. The very violence they are fleeing still continues today.
So next then, to turn towards, I guess, Taiwan, what are your thoughts on what Taiwan can do? Because a lot of us do work that are refugees and etc. And Taiwan honestly doesn't have a great record. But then Taiwan likes to say that, oh, we want to connect with Southeast Asia.
You know, I've been in Taiwan for a few days now. I've been to Taiwan before, this is my second time. And this time round, I really looked around me and I've done my research, been messaging Brian, annoying him with about 100 questions that he's been happy to answer. I've been really inspired by the resistance movement in Taiwan. I think there is a very strong resistance movement against the same regime that we're also fighting. And I think there's a lot that we can do. There's similarity. We want our own independence. We want our own democratic nation. And using that similarity as a tool to amplify both our voices. So I guess for me is what I want you to take away when you leave today is what can you do to support the Rohingya? It doesn't matter if you're Taiwanese and not Taiwanese. I've been very inspired by Taiwan itself. I was thinking, like, why are the Taiwanese people so calm? Like, you guys have faced such immense persecution, suffering. It's still today, like, you have missiles pointing at you, and I'm like, why are people on the streets just eating and just like roaming around and having I'm just so curious about their calmness. And I realized this is how you deal with the current situation. I know it's much more horrible than we think it is, but you still have some happiness in your life, and that gives me hope that I can still have that in my life. Because beyond everything I've spoken about in the last 10 minutes, I know it's horrendous and heavy, we still need to remember that there is life beyond, and then that's what Taiwan does to me. It reminds me that there is happiness in every single thing that we do. So yeah, I'm hoping today you can leave and think about what you can do. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I'm not telling you to go to the embassy and scream and shout. It could be just following us on Instagram and amplifying our voices and showcasing the Rohingya plight. Our Instagram is Rohingya Women Collaborative. Quite long, but Brian might pull it up. And we showcase a lot of our work on Instagram, especially the hate speech. We retrieve hate speech and analyze this very hate speech and post it to hold these accounts accountable. These are real life accounts. I've been looking at it for months now, and it actually makes me feel really disgusted in the stomach because these are like Malaysian and Indonesian accounts that have Free Palestine on it. They're like, Free Palestine, Free Gaza, and then the button's like, fuck the Rohingya refugees, these black cowards. And I'm like, wow, this is great content that's added. And we post it on our Instagram and they see it. These are the same people that are spreading hate speech and allowing for this hate speech to manifest to actual violence. So what we've seen in the last 2 years is actual violence, Rohingya boats being pushed back. Last year, 2 million Indonesians went to protest for Gaza. On the same day, a Rohingya boat was pushed by anti-Rohingya movements, physically pushed away in Aceh on the same day. And a 22-year-old young mum was on the boat with 2 children, and one of her child died from starvation on the boat. And you know how she buried her child? She threw her child in the ocean. And she came back and BBC interviewed her. And I looked at both days and I put it together and I thought, wow, this is just full-blown hypocrisy at its best. But yes, this is our Instagram. Please follow.
So maybe we can open up to Q&A. We have a lot of people here from Thai civil society, so we can have it as a more of a dialogue. So this way.
Comments, Q&A, anything. I feel like Beyonce.
First question.
Any questions, comments, anything?
I guess my for genocide and someone escalated it. Do you think that the potential fall of the Yangon regime, the Naypyidaw regime, would lead to hope in a better situation?
Yeah, so that's we've been working with the NUG quite closely to make sure that their process of democracy is inclusive of Rohingya, because whatever they do in terms of future Burma, Myanmar, meaningful democracy will never be meaningful without the inclusion of Rohingya. And they've done that in the past. During the 2011 to 2021 quasi-democratic period, Rohingya were not involved. Mass atrocities were happening left, right, centre, unchecked. So we're hoping that we've already started the reconciliation process in terms of truth-telling. We've met with women of Burma in the Chiang Mai, near Chiang Mai and Burma, and we've met with women from Karen, Pa'o, Kachin, and we spent 2 full days with them to showcase our similarities, that we've both gone through the same things. And for some of them, it was their first time meeting us. Some of them were crying, saying, we've lost friends because we've sided with the Rohingya. And today, we realized that this, the only positive thing about 2021 military coup is that now I've seen more people from Burma, Myanmar come to us and actually say sorry to us and realize that we are not the terrorists, we are not the perpetrators, it's the military junta. So I'm hoping that the future Burma will be inclusive of Rohingya if the NUG or another government is in place.
Question? Okay. So I'm curious then, in terms of, for example, what are there any positive precedents regionally, for example? Because Taiwan is often, for example, looking to other countries like, oh, we can do that too, because Taiwan's exclusion, I think, has something leads it not to take initiative, particularly on refugee issues.
I was telling someone earlier that my team and I, Yasmin and I, went to Muslim Mindanao a few months ago in the southern Philippines to see the work that they've been doing in terms of reconciliation. The Marawi community in particular, a persecuted Muslim ethnic group in the Philippines, they went through something similar. In 2017, there was a siege, killed thousands of Muslim Marawi people and displaced hundreds and thousands of Marawi Muslim women and men. And we went to visit their community, we worked with the Marawi women, we told them about our plight. And I'm sharing this because I've never seen anything like this. And the next day we had an event like this, a little bit more larger, about 200 people in the audience. And a group of Marawi women came in just holding signs going like, free Rohingya, end the genocide. And me and Yasmin looked at each other, we were like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely incredible, the solidarity. And I'm telling you this because we don't receive solidarity like that very much. And we would love to see more. And we had a couple of meetings with the government of Bangka, with civil society organizations, and they've made commitments to advocate for the Rohingya. Even the Bangka government was saying, why don't we start a resettlement process? Why don't we resettle some Rohingya refugees in Bangka? I think it would be really great because right now in Manila has a resettlement program for Rohingya refugees in the universities through a complementary pathway process, and they resettled 40 Rohingya students. So these Rohingya students picked up Tagalog within like 2 months. And we don't pick up the languages immediately because we want to, or because it's fun and we downloaded Duolingo, but it's because it's a survival tactic. For us to survive in the region, we need to pick up local languages. And sometimes, most of the time, I would say, we have to hide our identity. I mean, I'm such a privileged Rohingya. Even when I do go to Indonesia and Malaysia, I sometimes have to hide my identity out of the fear of safety. I was telling our group earlier that when I went to Malaysia last year, I went inside a taxi and this old Malaysian man, Muslim man, he had a free Palestine flag. I was so happy to see that. I said, oh, amazing, you're standing up for our Palestinian brothers and sisters. I said, what do you think of Rohingya? And he was so angry. I hate the Rohingya. They are the worst people in the world. They should not come to my country. steal our food, blah, blah. I lied to him. I didn't tell him I was Rohingya because I was so curious. It's like, Rohingya people are stateless. Did you know that? They, if they kill someone in Malaysia, how would we know? How would we put them in jail? It's like, oh, you know, part of the genocide was to remove their citizenship. So if one person does a bad thing, you can't collectively punish the entire people. He's like, yeah, but if it happened in your country, then you would be whinging and complaining as well. And I was like, yeah, I'm from India actually. And then I was like, there are 40,000 Rohingya in India and I feel really sorry for them. He was not having it. And I didn't tell him I was Rohingya out of fear that he might actually hurt me in the taxi. And that's just one incident of many racist incidents I've faced to my face by Malaysian and Indonesians that are Muslims as well. So being Muslim is not even good enough anymore.
Just an operational question, because you mentioned that a few members of your group are living in different places. So how do you, like, I know online platform is a thing, but just wanted to hear more in detail how you carry out.
Of course. So Yasmin and I, we have been working for the community for quite a while now, for about 10 years. And we were sort of doing it by ourselves in Australia, and she was in Canada. It was very lonely, the journey. Our community, unfortunately, because of 83 years of ongoing suppression, oppression, violence, genocide, whatever you want to call it, we've a heavily patriarchal community today. You won't see many women advocates, and we receive flack from in and out of the community that are men from our community that also tell us that this is not women's work and that we shouldn't be doing this work. We should be at home serving our husbands. And Yasmin and I, we thought, this is not right. We need to come up with something. And Yasmin and I, we've seen each other on social media. I've been a big fan of her. Like, who's this amazing lady with a Canadian accent? She's so smart. Like, I need to meet this Rohingya woman. I was like so blown away. I was so alone in this journey, but I still wanted to work for my community despite all the uncles giving me so much crap and shit. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna message her. And then we met up a couple of times in Asia and we did a bit of work, but we didn't really know each other very well. And then 2 years ago, we're like, let's go on a mission to Indonesia. And then that was the first mission. That was the first time we all met each other properly in the Indonesian documentary. So I keep pointing, that was Malaysian. There's another documentary I'll comment on. And we started the organization. We trained the 2 young girls and we took them to the camp. And then this year, we're training 4 young Rohingya girls in the US. So part of the work is also training Rohingya women to do work for the community. And a lot of the work is via Zoom, online, meeting up. We also meet up in the countries that we work in Thailand in particular, in Malaysia and Indonesia. But a lot of the work is also mentoring the women in our community to make sure that even when I'm no longer on this earth, the work continues. Hence why we also named our organization with our language to combat cultural erasure. We didn't do that to be fancy or to be fun. We did that to make sure that our language is always embedded, even if we're not here.
Thanks. A few comments and one question in the last. I just want to tell some local context for Myanmar and Taiwan. Actually, there's a big number of, maybe not necessarily Rohingya, but Burmese in Taiwan. There are maybe 140,000. There is a leader here. And there is a network of concerned people for the Burmese rebellion against the junta government. Okay, and there's a network, so there are several activists in the network here. So actually, there's an area in Taipei, there are many Burmese immigrants living there. So you can see the Burmese words there. And other than that, I know there are some Burmese there. They have been cheated and trafficked to Taiwan. I'm from a labor organization which run the shelter for migrant workers. In our shelter now we have 3 Burmese. They have been identified as victims from human trafficking. They were cheated to come to work as plumbers but in the end they were sent to work in the construction site, and the salary is only like about half of our minimum wage, which is already high for them, but it's too low here. So anyway, we are still doing a case for them, and the whole case is under prosecution. The last one we are waiting for is from Rakhine. Maybe he's a Rohingya, so we are still waiting for him. And so I have one question. You mentioned you stayed in Sabah before. I know it's very different from the Western Malaysia. So what's the difference between Rohingya refugee camps in the Western and the Eastern Malaysia?
So in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, Rohingya are not living in refugee camps. Most of them are living in hiding spots, like abandoned buildings, behind tarps, behind, where Bukit Bintang is? Has everyone been to Bukit Bintang? You see the main strip, all the children, they're all Rohingya children begging. You see all the women crying, they're all Rohingya. Some of them are just living on the streets. Some of them are hiding behind that huge temple in KL. What's that big temple name? I forgot. There's a huge temple with heaps of monkeys, and lots of Rohingya also hiding Batu caves. Lots of Rohingya also hiding behind the Batu caves. So there isn't refugee camps in Malaysia, but there are refugee camps in Indonesia. And the camps in Indonesia are absolutely horrendous. I got to see them when there was only one. And this one refugee camp was actually an orphanage. And they shut this orphanage down because when it rained, it would cause a lot of flooding because the housing was not sturdy enough. And now there are 7 refugee camps. So there's one refugee camp on a very small island where Rohingya are living on the beach underneath tarps. Some of them are also hiding underneath garages. And they have to keep moving because of the rise of Rohingya hate campaigns rising, especially last year during the Indonesian election. When Prabowo was running for election, the hate speech was rising immensely. And even if you Google it on Al Jazeera, they went to interview some of the Indonesians that were protesting, and they were saying, we don't want them here, we want them to go back. And some of them have no clue about why Rohingya are arriving in Indonesia. So we're seeing racism coupled with xenophobia, coupled with Rohingya being scapegoated from economic issues that are always going to be in these countries no matter what.
I actually wanted to ask a follow-up on that, because I remember when I met Yasmin, I think probably also you, was in Indonesia during the filming of that, and I just drifted in because of wanting to hang out with Savino. But then I put Yasmin in touch with Chinese organizations that work on disinformation. Is there anything that came out of, like, where is this coming from, and etc.?
Yeah, so we spoke at RightsCon actually that Taiwan hosted, and we've been able to also collaborate with other organizations working on misinformation, disinformation. And there was one workshop that I attended in Chiang Mai, and they were looking at some of the content. Some of the content were ridiculous. Like, there was a picture of a person selling vegetables on the road, and then Malaysians were posting saying, Rohingya are poisoning Malaysians. Why they're selling these poisonous food? And they analysed the picture, and it wasn't even a Rohingya, it was a Tamil. So they're just mixing all brown people together, saying that all brown people are the same. And it's crazy because they're brown themselves. So it's like, are you looking in the mirror? Like, you look exactly like us. And it's funny you say that, because during the hate speech we thought, let's have an art competition amongst Rohingya youth and Achinese youth. And we were receiving some of the submissions, and some of the submissions from the Achinese was, Rohingya and Achinese are family, but they painted Rohingya as brown and Indonesian as white, and I was really confused. I was like, we're the same skin color, like, this is crazy, but it was fun. We had a few winners. Incredible Rohingya girl won as well. She was 15. She painted her harrowing journey from Burma to Bangladesh to Indonesia, and it was horrible images are also incredible, and we posted that on social media and showcased to Indonesians that we're not economic migrants. We're not going to Bali to enjoy a 5-star hotel. We're actually arriving in Indonesia because we have zero choice.
Question?
I think earlier you mentioned that in the beginning that it was originally the military junta, but then I think you briefly mentioned that there were also starting to be other actors involved. I think you mentioned that there was the Chinese government with the pipeline that displaced villages. So besides the PRC government, are there also other foreign or other actors besides the military junta that's involved in the genocide?
Yes, Russia, India, Thailand, they're the main ones. At the beginning, the military, since 1942, in the 40s after World War, it was actually North Korea and Israel first that were funding the Burmese military junta. And the Burmese military junta were giving food in exchange because they had no money. They were giving the food that belonged to the people of Burma to these countries in exchange for weapons. And today the biggest funders of the military are China, Russia, and India. And then there are other countries that are also contributing to the weapons and also the flow of banks and money. Mainly Thailand is allowing for money to go through to the military.
Next question? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I don't think so. Okay, this one.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm from Germany, so we don't get a lot of news coverage in general about the region, I guess, less so about this issue, so it was very helpful. Thank you for sharing. I mean, the news that we got, I think, was mainly around 2017 when there was some reports, and then there was some reporting in 2021 about the military coup, and now there's a lot of coverage about the earthquake. I guess different region, but I wanted to ask if there's a sort of like a Rohingya perspective on the earthquake, with all these organizations collecting money now for the earthquake.
Yeah.
Do you have an angle to that?
We were absolutely devastated when we heard the news. Like, I remember waking up and seeing Burma on the news, not because of the military, but because of the earthquake, and my heart just broke, and I was thinking, and it was mainly people that also died while they were praying in the temples, the Buddhist temples, and in the mosque. And the reason why they died in the temples and the mosques is because the military didn't even let them renovate these buildings. They were not sturdy enough. And on top of that, the military were targeting Mandalay, that were the most impacted by the earthquake. Also conducting airstrikes while families were looking for their children under the rubble. It's been an absolutely heartbreaking few weeks now, and we've been encouraging people to donate to grassroots organizations that are able to provide aid to the people of Burma on the ground, not through the military, but through other avenues. And Rohingya, we stand with everyone that's persecuted. We stand with our brothers and sisters in Burma. We consist of more than 135 ethnic groups, and at the end of the day, we are all one. So our heart is completely broken, and it's still broken. And right now I'm just thinking, because the earthquake was in the media, and then now is Burma just going to be pushed to the side again? And I mean, even during the earthquake, nobody was really covering about the military abuses, and that's been happening for a very long time.
Next question? Okay, well, I think then I critically also want to ask then, for example, we talked a bit before about the indigenous movement in Taiwan. How do you see points of connection, for example? Because, of course, Rohingya are indigenous.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I had so many questions for you, Brian, on this. I was like, how many percent of Taiwan is indigenous? And I was looking at it, and I was doing research, and I think it was like 2 to 5%. And there was times where indigenous people were massacred by Western countries and Japan, China, and I was looking for information for it, but I can still feel the resistance when I'm walking around the streets. Like I'm looking at people and I'm thinking, wow, like what have you gone through? Like what have your people gone through? And what have you done? And I'm left inspired, and I'm looking at how I really wanted to meet your friend actually, the indigenous activist you speak about, and look at the ways that she's done this in Taiwan. And I want to put this question back to you and tell me, what can Rohingya learn from the indigenous people of Taiwan? What do you think we can take away?
And Megan's talking about on, but she's in the middle of in another town, so there's that. Next time, I guess. Maybe last round of questions? Going once?
Comments?
Or comments. Comments are fun too. Alright, going once, twice. Okay. Alright, thank you everybody. So we give you a round of applause.
Can I just mention one thing? We have an online campaign called I Stand with Rohingya. There's just a little board over there in green, and you can see pictures of the exhibitions of Rohingya belonging that one of my friends has been collecting for 20 years to showcase that Rohingya are not these aliens and boogeymen, we're actually indigenous people of our land. But if you would like, please take photos with a sign and tag us on Instagram so we can share that around. It just showcases solidarity between Rohingya and other communities. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
We're going to stay open for a while. We'll probably volunteer once if you'd like to buy a drink and we can talk more casually. Thank you. Thanks everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Better? I've been teaching English online. Best guesstimate, I would say 30% mortality outwise, 30% serious people, 30% elementary and high school students, and then the rest are people too much money to